Hello all, this is your Professor Ian. Welcome to what I call my super duper quick intro to Greek drama. Uh, we're not spending enough time with Greek drama to get into every facet of it, so this is a very quick overview of what Greek drama looked like, what it was, how it was experienced by the people during the classical Athenian period, and what we should think about that. So let's get into it. Let's start with the roots of classical Athenian Greek tragedy and drama. So it comes from a tradition called the city Dionysia. So this is a religious ceremony, a festival of entertainment held in the honor of the god Dionysus. So it has its religious roots in the 6th century BCE, if you want to use that terminology. In Athens, created to honor mostly Dionysus, but it was also used. It was in general to honor the gods, right? But mostly Dionysus, because it was a festival of revelry and entertainment. So it included religious aspects. A statue of Dionysus carried into the theater. There were sacrifices to Dionysus in the actual theater. I'll show you a map of what a theater would look like. You can see how that would be a very central part of what was happening. Again, this is combining entertainment and religious practice into one ceremonial day. Okay? So it was called the city Dionysia. Took place in March or April over the course of 5 days, depending on the weather. Right, this is kind of a springtime festival. Remember, Dionysus was the god of the vine, of the harvest. He was a vegetation god, right? So part of like the fertility rites that were important to agrarian society. Sorry. So it had these religious aspects. Began with a procession honoring Dionysus. Right, all the citizens would participate, men and women. During the second day, there was music, songs, again praising Dionysus, very religious aspect. And on the last 3 days of the festival, the actors performed 3 tragedies, 1 satyr, and 1 comedy. So a very structured kind of progression through these different parts of the ceremony, their ceremonial religious roots. So it was also very official. A state official would select 3 poets to compete for prizes in the tragedy division, right? So the tragedy division was a competition. Remember how the Greeks love competition, right? It's all about that competition. So again, the 3 tragedians would compete for the honor of the best play during the festival of Dionysus. Wealthy citizens would help pay for this, put this on. These were costly shows with great costumes, fancy special effects for the era, right? And a lot of training and time went into these. These were not amateur productions. These were extremely costly productions, especially as we get into the classical, what we think of as classical Athens, like the 4th century BCE, with our big poets and playwrights. Right, this was a big deal. Athens was the center of Greek culture at the time, so this was kind of like the apex of Athenian culture at a time when Athens was the cultural center of the Greek world. So you can imagine how big a deal this was. Right, there was a winning poet selected by a jury of citizens, and these plays offer kind of moral and ethical lessons using classical mythology and classical heroes from mythology, right? So they're meant to have a kind of intellectual and moral aspect to these plays. They're not just for entertainment. It's not like they were going to see the play version of Die Hard or something like that, right? These were thoughtful and what's the word I'm looking for? Morally uplifting plays, or at least morally interesting. They gave the citizens something to debate using these classical themes from mythology. So going even further back, the origins of drama in general. Drama comes from musical roots. Originally, drama was, or theater, the theater that was put on was much more musical in nature. It involved, choral hymns sung by 50 men or boys, right? So a very musical background to the theater The plays that have survived that we read don't have the music attached to them. We don't think of them in that way. We think of them much more as modern plays where you have people on stage enacting a drama, using voices rather than song. But for the ancient Greeks, music and dance were inherently part of these religious ceremonies, these festivals, and even their plays that were part of the festivals. The word itself, tragedian, derives from words meaning goat song, which I always get a kick out of, right? Now, we don't really know exactly why that is. These are old words that came together to form what we call tragedy, tragedian. What a lot of archaeologists and classicists think is that the choruses were dressed in the skins of goats, and the prize for the best song was a goat. So there's a lot of connection to goats. And that's, that might sound weird, but it's unsurprising because Dionysus is, associated with the animal nature of man. He's associated a lot with the satyrs. They were part of his followers, right? These half men, half goats beasts were part of his group. So for a festival honoring Dionysus to have such a heavy emphasis on goats isn't actually that surprising when you start thinking about that Dionysian influence on it, right? It is kind of funny to think about such an important role for goats in this thing, but again, Dionysus has this real connection to goats and that animal side of humankind, so it makes sense. Now, we don't know for sure, but that's our best theory. So let's go over some important names associated with the classic Athenian drama. Aristophanes, a classic comedic playwright. He's the most representative. We have the most comedy plays attributed to him, Aristophanes. The clouds, the wasps, the frogs. And he's making fun of a lot of contemporary social issues. We're not reading any of the comedies, but some of them are pretty funny. I know Spike Lee did a version of this not too long ago. So it's he's our best surviving representative comedy. The big three names in tragedy you should be remembering. You should try to keep in mind after you finish the course, because these are the ones that everybody talks about. They are the ones that survive the test of time. So one imagines maybe they're the best. Aeschylus wrote a number of works. My favorite is Agamemnon. It's the story of Agamemnon returning from the war and being murdered by Clytemnestra. And then, it's a trilogy, his son getting revenge for his death and everything. It's a great trilogy, but my favorite is Agamemnon. It's got some great scenes in it. Sophocles, we're reading Oedipus, right? Oedipus the king is the first of the trilogy. Oedipus the king, Oedipus at Colonus, and then Antigone. So that's a trilogy. We're just reading the first, Oedipus the king. Ajax is one of my favorites too. That's it's dealing with so after Hector's been killed and Achilles gives Hector's armor to Odysseus instead of Ajax, and Ajax ends up committing suicide because he's so dishonored. Anyways, fun guy. And my favorite playwright, Euripides. Euripides I always find to be the weirdest of the playwrights. He does odd things, like in his version of Heracles, he reverses the order of things. So in the classic Heracles story, he's driven mad by Hera and murders his family, and as punishment, he has to go and do the 12 labors. In Euripides' version, he reverses the order so that Heracles is just returned from his labors and then murders his family for no reason. It's a really odd choice to make and really interesting. He does a lot of interesting things like that, playing with the myths and like changing them up, right? And that's an interesting, this is what these playwrights are doing, is they're using the classical material, but they're not beholden to exactly, the orthodox telling of those stories, partially because there is no real orthodox telling of any of these stories. There are multiple versions, so they're allowed to take liberties with the story. Plus, that makes it more interesting for people watching this, everybody knows the basic story of Heracles, and he can't totally change it. He can't, have Heracles get abducted by aliens or something like that, but he can play with the order of events, and he can bring out different parts of Heracles' character by doing so. So anyways, those are three big names plus the big comedy name, Aristophanes. So this is what a Greek theater would have looked like. This is a kind of a schemata of it. The audience would be sitting in this area here, the seats, right? Here, the orchestra, the thymele, that's where the sacrifices would have taken place. And like I said, so when they're having sacrifices to Dionysus, you can see how central a place that would have taken in the festival, right? Everybody's gathered around to watch the play, and the sacrifice is taking place right dead center. The parados, that's where people come in and out. The prosecium, that's basically the stage. We still use that term today. And then the skene is basically backstage, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so that's a basic diagram of what a Greek theater would have looked like. Here's one example of a surviving Greek theater, or at least the ruins of it. We don't have the skene and all that, but you can see the seating. You can see where the orchestra part would have been, the sacrificial area. People would have come in, the parados, the actors, and everybody else would have come in through these thoroughfares, right? It's a big seating area too. Let's think of it like kind of like a half stadium or something like that. So just to break down some of these terms, right? Where people sat, the orchestra, that's this part here. This is where the chorus would have been, right? So the chorus, as we'll see in Oedipus, there's the actors, acting their lines, interacting with each other. There's also this chorus, which sometimes seems to interact with, or sometimes does interact with the actors, but usually just seems to comment on the action and speak directly to the audience. So that's what it would have looked like. They would be there, and the actors would have been up here acting at the main drama. The thymele, right, that's that altar in the middle of the orchestra, the parados where people come in and out, the proscenium, so the stage where the actors would have acted main action, and then the skene. So this would be the part behind that proscenium, right, behind the main stage where the actors would be acting at the main action. And so the skene would have been a structure where the actors could change costumes, get dressed, all that kind of stuff, or wait to be brought on stage for different scenes. It was also the place where they would launch special effects. A big special effects is called the Deus Ex Machina, where they would, if there was a god present, they would have an actor suspended on like a harness held up above the stage to represent different gods. Or there's another god or another play, the Bacchae, where Dionysus speaks, but he doesn't actually show himself in that scene. So instead, the voice would have come from that skene, from the balcony of the skene, to represent the voice of that god speaking to mortals, right? So they had special effects like this. Here's some diagrams of what it might look like, right? With the crane would reach out the actor, right? This could also, the skene would also be the set. So it would be the palace that the actors were acting in front of, or whatever set it was. Usually a palace, because we're always, with tragedy, we're talking about the great men, the great rulers falling from their tragic flaws. So there's that diagram, right? The crane lowering, it could have lowered actors or held actors above the scene. Here's a couple more pictures of the ruins of Greek theaters. Right? You can see the perspective if you were in the audience. Right? It would have been a kind of grand spectacle. I love this picture too, because you can just see, in the background, the hills and the beautiful Greek countryside, and just what a spectacle that would have been, right? And then here's an artist conception of what it would look like to be at an actual play, right? Be in the audience. And you can see down here, right? This would be the chorus, a group of men in costume acting at the chorus's part. And then here, the proscenium, right? And the skene. So this is where Oedipus would be talking with Creon or Jocasta or whatnot, right? Maybe multiple levels. And then from the top, you could lower, or from the balcony here, you could lower, do the Deus Ex Machina if that's part of the play. So that's just an artist conception. Okay, in part two, I'll talk about Greek tragedy itself.